Flora. A young teenage girl named Flora was walking through a cornfield one day when suddenly she heard a whimpering noise. As Flora followed the whimpering noises, she thought to herself it sounded like a puppy. As she neared the small den-like hole under a rock, she saw that there was a sick, malnourished pit bull with a litter of puppies. Crouching down, she held her hand out to the mother. The mother pit smelled her hand and then dropped her head down on the ground in exhaustion. As Flora looked, she saw that there were 6 puppies. Unfortunately, only one was still alive, and it was just barely clinging to life. Not knowing what to do, the girl grabbed the puppy, stuck it in her shirt, and ran home. When she ran through the kitchen door, she was screaming, "Mom, Dad, is someone home? I need help. Help me. Come quick, there's a sick dog that needs our help." When she realized no one was home, she ran to her next-door neighbor. Mrs. Kelly was in her mid-70s and had many pets and lots of experience working with them. After telling the elderly woman what was wrong, they ran into the field where the mother dog was lying. Mrs. Kelly collected the dead puppies and put them in a box. Then she looked at the mother and told Flora, "I don't think she will make it, but this is in God's hands, not ours." And with that, they went back to Mrs. Kelly's home. Flora took care of the puppy while Mrs. Kelly went to go to the field, to feed the mother some milk and eggs. The milk and eggs gave the mother more energy and will help her be able to feed her baby, said Mrs. Kelly. As Mrs. Kelly watched Flora, she wondered if the young girl's parents would let her keep the puppy. After examining it, she found that it was a boy, about a week old. The little guy was black with one solid white foot. The mother, although sickly, appeared to be a genuinely nice, gentle dog. When the puppy whined for its mother, Mrs. Kelly watched as Flora picked up the young puppy and brought it to its mother for her to smell and lick. Mrs. Kelly knew that Flora's home life was not amazing. She knew that the 16-year-old girl was abused. Because of this, Mrs. Kelly knew that Flora would not be allowed to keep the rescued pair, and that if they were to have a home, she would have to keep them both. When Flora walked back home, her mother opened the door and screamed at her, wanting to know where she had been all day. Her mother screamed that she just needed to wait until her father got home and she would regret everything, not cleaning the house, running off to the field, and bothering the neighbor. When Flora tried to explain things to her mother, she slapped her and told her to shut up and get a broom and start sweeping the porch. Flora was told that she would not have dinner, that she would sleep outside. When her father got home, he beat her and told her that she was worthless. The night was cold, but Flora made it through, using a thick blanket Mrs. Kelly had given her for times like this. As she laid on the cold porch, she wished and prayed that Mrs. Kelly would become her real mom. The next morning, when Flora woke up, she made breakfast for her mom and dad, then went to work. She cleaned the walls, the floors, the cupboards, the bathrooms, and did all the laundry and dishes, hoping it would be enough. When she felt confident that her parents would not beat her when they got home, she went to see Mrs. Kelly. As soon as she ran to her house, Mrs. Kelly grabbed her and gave her a big hug and told her she was sorry. She had witnessed everything that had happened last night and asked if she was okay. Flora asked if she could name both the mother and pup. Of course, Mrs. Kelly had no problem with this and told her of course she could. Mrs. Kelly asked if she had already had a name picked out. Flora told her that the pup should be named Blue and that the mother, being a beautiful black color, was going to be called Midnight. At dinner time, Flora made her dinner for her parents and herself. Afterwards, she went outside to sweep the porch. Mrs. Kelly saw her standing with the broom in hand and looking at the tall willow tree swaying in the wind. So Mrs. Kelly, being a great woman, called Flora to come to her. Of course, Flora came running to her, asking what was wrong. Mrs. Kelly told her that she just wanted her to know that she wanted her to have the puppy, even if her parents were not okay with it. She explained that she would keep the puppy on a chain outside for Flora when it got older. She could come visit Blue anytime she wanted. When Flora asked about Midnight, Mrs. Kelly told her that she was still weak and that she would probably have to stay a house dog forever. Of course, she would be able to see her pup all the time. She also told Flora that she was going to get her out of her house so that she would not have to deal with her parents anymore, and she would be safe. The day Flora turned 18, she moved in with Mrs. Kelly and the dogs. Midnight had recovered from being malnourished and ran outside all the time. Blue did not stay outside during the harsh winter the year they found him. Mrs. Kelly could not bring herself to keep him outside on the chain all day. Mrs. Kelly and Flora were happy together. Eventually, Flora's parents decided to move away. So Flora bought the house and made it her own. Flora and Mrs. Kelly now live in peace and harmony side by side with their loyal companions. The end.
Arthur Tuffing was a man of heart. He knew what things were and why they happened. He worked as a radio show host in the year 2074 and was a philosopher of sorts. A man in his early 30s, attractive in his own way but kept mostly to himself. The man didn't have many friends, and those he did have grew distant until they stopped talking altogether. Arthur now walked through the desolate town he once called home, where he was born and raised, and kept his eyes on the ground. Those who still lived here stayed indoors, and now watched the newcomer through their shutters or the peepholes on their doors. The man was strange. He didn't dress like he was from around here. He dressed nicer than most, clean-shaven, with long brunette hair that fell over his shoulders, pulled back in a ponytail at the nape of his neck. One hand in his pocket, the other holding the crowhead walking stick, he began to look around. He remembered his growing up here as colorful and fun, but now his street was dull and lifeless. A woman holding a toddler's hand crossed the street to walk on the opposite sidewalk. These people were paranoid, Arthur mumbled to himself. He wasn't in the least bit frightening, at least to his knowledge. He was taller than most men, though, and had glaring dark eyes that peered into the very soul of all who looked into them. Arthur was sent here by the government to examine the stories and legends of what the residents called the Dark Dogs. They described them appearing in canine-like bodies with howls that pierced the night sky like a knife through a mirror. He was now on the search for these so-called Dark Dogs. Arthur pushed the door open to a restaurant with his shoulder, and the room seemed to go still. All eyes turned to watch the newcomer as he strolled over to a booth near the back. Heads followed his movement as he pulled off his coat and sat it down in the seat close to the window, sighing and sitting beside it. A thin waitress with stringy blonde hair approached. She placed a dirty menu in front of the man, her eyes on her hands to avoid eye contact. "Can I get you anything?" Her voice was quiet, shaky, almost musical. The room was silent, waiting for the stranger's answer. It came almost immediately. "Yes, ma'am, I'll take a water." The man's work had eventually led him to a small barn on the outskirts of town. Strange noises accompanied by the occasional growl were coming from the inside. Arthur pushed open the door to the barn, grunting as he shoved away some hay in a pile of dirt, shoving over a barrel. The creature in the corner gasped and went still, its silhouette just a heap against the wall. Arthur stepped inside, kicking aside a small body of what he thought was a mouse. It turned out to be alive and ran, scurrying off in a zigzag fashion towards the corner of the barn. The dog stood still now, watching and listening as the man approached. Backed into a corner, the dog hunched up, a low growl rising into its throat. "Easy," Arthur mumbled, his hand rising slowly. "I just want to get a sample." The dog sat back on its haunches, upper lip rising in a snarl. The man carefully stepped over piles of debris and hay, leaning down slowly. He unhooked the lead from his back belt loop and hooked it around the dog's neck. The dog snarled and snapped at his hand, which quickly retreated. "There, man, you've grown a lot since I was a boy, Spot. My mother would be proud."
My trip to Washington, D.C. I was excited for my trip to Washington, D.C. I couldn't wait to see the White House, the monuments, and maybe even the president. Washington was a long 5-hour drive from my neighborhood. We loaded our things into my car and took a seat next to my baby brother. Luckily, he only cried half the way. As we neared the city of Washington, D.C., I began to see the tall buildings, lots of traffic, and even caught a glimpse of the top of the Washington Monument. My family and I headed right to the Washington Zoo. It was going to be our first stop on our trip. We saw huge elephants, roaring lions, and a baby monkey. After spending hours at the zoo, we headed to the Awesome Hotel. We had to park our car in an underground garage. We went right to our room and went to bed early since we had many plans for the next day. On our second day in Washington, we decided to walk around the city. We got a map from our hotel to navigate the city. First, we went to the White House. It had a big fence around it so no one could get too close. Next, we went to the Washington Monument. It was so tall that it looked like it could touch the clouds. After that, we walked along the reflecting pool. There was a family of ducks swimming in the middle of the pool. The reflecting pool led us to the Lincoln Memorial. Big stone steps were like climbing a mountain. When we were done exploring the city, we stopped for souvenirs at a little stand beside the street. We also got our dinner from a food truck. On our third day in D.C., we planned to visit some museums. Then make the long trip home. The first museum we saw was the Space Museum. It had rockets hanging from the ceiling. The next museum we saw was the Museum of National History. There was a lot of people waiting to get in, so we had to wait in line outside. Luckily, there was a man who played guitar and sang on the street, so he kept us entertained. Then when we finally got through the doors, we had to be scanned by metal detectors to make sure we weren't carrying any weapons. In this museum, we saw fossils, ancient artifacts, and even got to take a picture of ourselves to see which ancient human species we may have been. When we departed our national capital, I was a little sad. There were many things I didn't get to see. My parents told me that we could go back another time to visit the places we had missed. Washington was my most favorite vacation yet. Perhaps next time I'm in Washington, D.C., I'll be the president.